NASA recently announced a major discovery. They found water on the sunlit side of the moon.
We've always been told the moon is a lifeless rock. But what if that's not the whole story?
3 lost NASA videotape recordings of the first landing on the moon are about to go under the auctioneer's hammer in New York.
Over the years, astronauts have hinted at things they saw up there. Things that NASA doesn't like to talk about. Strange lights, unidentified objects, and eerie transmissions that make you wonder if we've been watched this whole time.
There's definitely been conspiracies that have been put together and executed, and these conspiracies have greatly affected the American people.
And now, leaked footage has surfaced that's just brought more questions than answers. If this is real, it could change everything we thought we knew about space. Like the not-so-hidden alien probe. Back in 1998, during the STS-88 space shuttle mission, NASA astronauts were out there minding their business, working on the International Space Station, when they snapped a photo of something weird, a dark, jagged-looking object just floating in orbit. It wasn't part of the shuttle. It wasn't a piece of space debris anyone had catalogued. It was just there. And when that photo made its way to the public, the internet did what it does best. It ran wild with questions and theories about what this could be. That's how the legend of the Dark Knight satellite was born. Some believe this isn't just another random piece of junk lost in space. It's an ancient alien probe that's been orbiting Earth for thousands of years, silently watching us. And honestly, the idea kind of makes sense. If an advanced civilization was keeping tabs on us, wouldn't they have something nearby? Something that doesn't make a sound, doesn't send signals we can detect, just sits up there, observing. It's creepy to think about, but also kind of fascinating. Now, NASA had a much more boring explanation. According to them, the Dark Knight wasn't a satellite at all. It was just a thermal blanket that got loose during the mission. A simple mistake. Nothing to see here. But I don't know about you. That explanation feels a little too convenient. I mean, a thermal blanket in a stable orbit, looking nothing like the shiny, crumpled foil we've seen in other space debris images. I'm not saying it's definitely an alien probe, but let's be real. This thing doesn't look like any ordinary piece of lost equipment. Of course, skeptics have torn this theory apart, saying it's just a case of misidentification. But here's the thing. This object was real. It was photographed. It was documented. It wasn't just some blurry UFO caught on a shaky camera, and NASA's quick dismissal only made all of this sound a lot more suspicious. If it was just a piece of space junk, why did the image get so much attention? Why does this theory refuse to die decades later? Personally, I think the Dark Knight satellite is one of those mysteries that sits in the perfect sweet spot. Just believable enough to make you question things, but just unexplained enough to keep you wondering. Is it an alien artifact? A secret military project? Or are we just seeing what we want to see? Whatever the case, I can't help but feel like something's up there, watching. The Apollo 11 alien base. Apollo 10 was never meant to land on the moon, but it did something just as interesting. It took photos that NASA probably wishes it hadn't. One of those images shows something that flat out shouldn't be there, the shard. If you've never heard of it, it's basically a jagged, towering structure rising miles above the lunar surface, sticking out like a sore thumb in a place that's supposed to be nothing but craters and dust. Now, NASA never made a big deal about this photo. They just tossed it in with the rest of the Apollo images like it was just another random rock. But here's the thing. The moon isn't exactly known for skyscrapers, and when you zoom in on this thing, it doesn't look like your typical lunar formation. It's uneven, almost fractured, and seems to cast a long shadow. That's not normal. Some say it's an illusion, Just a weird trick of light and camera noise. But here's where it gets even weirder. The shard isn't the only anomaly people have spotted in old Apollo photos. There's also the castle, a bizarre, floating-looking structure, and strange reflective domes that shouldn't exist. Put them together, and you start to wonder, were the Apollo missions just photographing rocks, or did they accidentally capture something else? If the shard is real, what is it? Santa Claus. Apollo 11 wasn't just about landing on the moon, it also came with one of the most famous astronaut UFO sightings in history. While en route to the moon, the crew saw something strange outside their spacecraft. It wasn't a star, it wasn't space junk they could immediately identify, it was something. Buzz Aldrin later confirmed in interviews that they saw an unknown object following them. And that's when things got really interesting. At the time, the astronauts were careful about what they said over open communication channels. Instead of outright calling it a UFO, they asked Houston where the SIVB, the Saturn V rocket's third stage, was. NASA told them it was over 6,000 miles away, meaning whatever they saw wasn't part of their own spacecraft. But instead of pushing the issue, the crew went quiet, possibly to avoid public panic or breaking NASA's strict communication rules. Years later, Aldrin admitted that they had seen something unusual, but NASA insisted it was just a piece of detached rocket debris. That explanation doesn't fully add up, though. If it was just space junk, why did they sound so careful talking about it? And why did multiple Apollo missions report seeing similar unknown objects? Some believe this wasn't a one-time sighting, but part of a larger cover-up. Astronauts allegedly used the phrase Santa Claus as a code word for UFOs, something Apollo 11 may have hinted at when they reached the moon. During a transmission, Neil Armstrong reportedly said, "Santa Claus is real," a phrase many think was a coded way of saying, "We are not alone." NASA, of course, denies that the phrase had anything to do with UFOs, but the fact remains, Apollo 11 saw something, and nobody can say for sure what it was. A piece of space debris? Maybe. But when the first men to walk on the moon say they saw something unknown out there, you have to wonder, what else aren't we being told? The Moon Spire. NASA's Lunar Orbiter program was supposed to map the moon's surface in preparation for the Apollo missions, but in 1967, it accidentally photographed something that defied explanation: a thin, towering spire rising straight up from the lunar surface. That's not normal. The moon is supposed to be a barren wasteland of craters and dust, not home to tall, shadow-casting structures. But there it was, clear as day. NASA's response? The usual, "It's nothing, don't worry about it." They suggested it might be a glitch, a smudge, or an image artifact. But here's the problem. Glitches don't cast shadows, and this thing definitely had a shadow stretching across the surface, meaning it was a physical, three-dimensional object. That little detail alone blew a hole in the official explanation. Once the image went public, the theories started rolling in. Some believed the spire was an alien structure, maybe a communications tower or the remains of an ancient lunar base. Others thought it could be an incredibly rare natural rock formation. But that theory raises another question: how does a massive, solitary spire just form like that? There's no known geological process on the moon that would create a freestanding monolith. China's Mystery Hut. China's Yutu-2 rover was just rolling along on the far side of the moon in 2021 when it spotted something strange on the horizon, a perfectly cube-shaped object standing all by itself. It looked nothing like the usual scattered lunar rocks or cratered terrain. It was so bizarre that China's space agency, CNSA, nicknamed it the Mystery Hut and decided to investigate. Naturally, the internet had a field day. Was this an alien structure? Or maybe even worse, a hidden moon base? The fact that it was spotted on the far side of the moon, the part we never see from Earth, only made it all even worse. Conspiracy theories practically wrote themselves. For weeks, U-22 slowly made its way toward the object, and anticipation built as people waited for clearer images. But when the rover finally got close, the big reveal was underwhelming. The Mystery Hut was just a weirdly shaped rock sitting on the edge of a crater. The angle and lighting had made it appear far more structured than it actually was. The Martian monolith? In 2009, NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter snapped a photo of something that should not exist, a massive, perfectly rectangular object standing all by itself on the Martian surface. It looked like a giant monolith, just sitting there, as if someone or something had placed it intentionally. Naturally, NASA rushed to calm everyone down. "Oh, don't worry, it's just a rock," they said. "Totally natural, nothing weird here." Right, because nature is constantly out here carving giant smooth-edged rectangles in the middle of nowhere. I get that erosion can do some wild things, but what are the odds of a chunk of rock breaking that perfectly? The monolith appears to be a freestanding structure, with clean lines and a uniform shape that makes it look anything but random. NASA claims it's a result of natural fracturing, where a piece of bedrock broke away in a straight-edged fashion, but that explanation doesn't sit right with everyone. The lack of surrounding debris makes it even stranger. If this was just a broken-off chunk, where's the rest of it? And just to make things even sketchier, there's another one on Phobos, one of Mars's moons. The Phobos monolith is even more bizarre, standing over 278 feet tall and casting a massive shadow across the surface. Unlike the Mars monolith, which could be lying flat, the Phobos monolith is a towering vertical structure, making it look even less like something nature would just randomly form. Buzz Aldrin, of all people, even pointed it out, saying humans should probably check it out. That's right, the second person to walk on the moon literally said, "We should visit the monolith on Phobos." So, what are we looking at here? Is this just an incredibly lucky geological coincidence, or are these structures something more? Some have speculated that if ancient civilizations existed on Mars, this would be exactly the kind of thing they'd leave behind, an unmistakable marker standing out against the barren landscape. The ringing on the moon. When Apollo astronauts crashed their spent lunar modules into the moon, something unexpected happened. The moon rang like a bell. Seismometers left behind by the Apollo 12 crew recorded the vibrations, and instead of fading quickly like they would on Earth, the tremors lasted for hours. This wasn't a one-time event either. During Apollo 13, NASA sent the SVB rocket booster on a collision course with the lunar surface. When it hit, the moon shook for over 3 hours. Scientists were baffled. On Earth, seismic waves weaken as they pass through layers of rock and liquid. But the moon, it kept vibrating, almost like it was hollow. That's where things get weird. Some theorists took this as evidence that the moon isn't a naturally solid body, but a massive artificial structure, possibly even a spacecraft. The idea sounds wild, but it gained traction after NASA's own scientists admitted they couldn't fully explain why the moon's seismic behavior was so different from Earth's. NASA's official explanation? The moon's dry, fractured interior prevents seismic waves from dissipating the way they do on Earth, which has a molten core and water-rich geology. But that hasn't stopped people from talking about it. If the moon really is just a dead rock, why does it react so strangely to impacts? Adding another layer to the mystery, NASA actually lost the original Apollo seismic data. Some of it was only recovered in 2020, when a digitization project unearthed hours of archived audio and records. Why was this information sitting in storage for decades, practically forgotten? And more importantly, does NASA know something they're not telling us? Whether it's just a quirk of lunar geology or something far more bizarre, the fact remains: when you hit the moon, it rings. The mysterious flashes of light on the moon. For centuries, people have been spotting strange flashes of light on the moon, and honestly, I can't blame anyone for thinking something weird is going on up there. These bursts of brightness, now called transient lunar phenomena, have been recorded by astronomers for hundreds of years, and we're not just talking about a few random flickers. Some of these lights glow for minutes at a time before fading away. The one thing that makes this super crazy is that Apollo astronauts saw them too. While orbiting the moon, they reported seeing sudden flashes on the surface, as if something was lighting up the darkness. Now, if a few amateur stargazers had mentioned it, maybe you could chalk it up to wishful thinking. But when trained astronauts in space start talking about it, you have to wonder, what exactly are we looking at here? NASA's official response was short and direct: "We're still investigating." That's science speak, for we have no idea. Some researchers think the flashes might be caused by meteors slamming into the surface, lighting up on impact. Others suggest that gas could be escaping from underground, which raises another interesting question: why is a supposedly dead, geologically inactive moon still venting gas? And then there's the more out-there theory that these lights aren't natural at all. Some of these flashes have been seen in the exact same spots over and over again. If these were just random impacts, shouldn't they be, well, random? Instead, certain locations seem to light up again and again, almost like signals, artificial structures, something someone or something left behind. NASA and modern telescopes have even caught these flashes on video, so whatever's causing them, it's very real. The only question is whether it's just the moon being weird or proof of something much bigger. You know, like the water. For the longest time, we thought the moon was as dry as a bone, just a dusty rock floating through space with nothing but craters and old Apollo footprints. But in recent years, NASA and other space agencies confirmed something game-changing. There's water on the moon, and not just a tiny bit, potentially millions of tons of it. The first hints came decades ago when Apollo astronauts brought back lunar soil samples. Some scientists thought they detected tiny traces of water, but NASA wasn't convinced. Then, in 2009, an impact experiment with the L-Cross probe confirmed it. When the probe crashed into a crater at the moon's south pole, it kicked up a plume of water vapor and ice. That meant there wasn't just moisture in the soil, there were actual deposits of ice hiding in permanently shadowed craters where sunlight never reaches. And it gets crazier. In 2020, NASA used an airborne telescope called SOFIA to find water molecules on the sunlit surface of the moon. This was a shock because any water exposed to direct sunlight should have evaporated instantly. So how is it staying put? Some scientists think it's trapped inside tiny glass-like beads formed by ancient meteor impacts, protecting it from the harsh space environment. But here's the big question: where did all this water come from? Some theories say it was delivered by ice-rich comets slamming into the moon billions of years ago. Others suggest the sun itself may be responsible, with solar wind reactions creating water molecules in the lunar soil. No matter the source, the implications are huge. Water on the moon means future astronauts could potentially drink it, use it for fuel, and even sustain long-term lunar bases. And if we're talking about colonizing space, finding water this close to Earth is an absolute game changer. Similar to how the Shard did. The moon has its fair share of weird sightings, but the Shard might be one of the strangest. If you haven't heard of it, picture this: an enormous jagged tower sticking straight out of the lunar surface, looking completely out of place. This thing isn't some tiny rock formation either. Estimates suggest it could be several miles tall. It was supposedly captured in photos taken during the Apollo missions, though NASA has never officially acknowledged it. Some say it's just a photographic anomaly, but others believe it could be something far more interesting. The most famous image of the Shard comes from Apollo 10, the mission that served as a dress rehearsal for the first moon landing. In this grainy black and white photo, you can see what looks like a towering object casting a shadow on the surface. Unlike the surrounding landscape, which is smooth and cratered, the Shard appears jagged and irregular, almost as if it was broken off from something much larger. Naturally, this has people talking. Some think it's just an illusion created by a combination of light, camera artifacts, and lunar dust. Others believe it could be the remnants of an ancient structure, possibly even artificial. And that's where things get interesting. If the Shard really is some kind of unnatural formation, it would completely change the way we think about the moon. Could it be evidence that someone or something was there before us? Some theorists even suggest it might be connected to other strange lunar anomalies, like the so-called castle or the weird reflective domes spotted in old photos. There's even speculation that NASA has been quietly editing or suppressing images of these objects to avoid public curiosity. Of course, the more skeptical take is that the Shard is just another example of our brains looking for patterns in chaos. The moon's surface is full of odd formations, and without an atmosphere, shadows can play tricks on the eyes. But still, if it's just a random rock, why does it look so out of place? And why haven't we ever gotten a clearer look at it? The same way we couldn't get another look at O'Neill's bridges. Back in 1953, an astronomer named John J. O'Neill claimed to have spotted something that shouldn't exist: a massive bridge-like structure on the moon. He was scanning the lunar surface with his telescope when he saw what looked like a gigantic arch stretching across a crater in the Mare Crisium region. Naturally, this sent the UFO and conspiracy communities into overdrive. O'Neill was a well-respected science editor, so people actually took him seriously. Other astronomers, including Dr. H.P. Wilkins, later claimed to see the same thing, describing it as a perfectly structured bridge around 12 miles long. Wilkins even went on record saying, "No known natural process can account for such a structure." If that's not a statement designed to stir up speculation, I don't know what is. NASA, of course, brushed the whole thing off. Later studies suggested that O'Neill's bridge was likely an optical illusion caused by light and shadows playing tricks on telescopes. But here's where things get weird. The structure seemed to disappear over time. Some claim it was never there to begin with, while others think it was a real formation that either collapsed or was covered up by lunar dust. The humanoid living on Mars. This first incident of NASA's nasty secrets is a crazy one. So here's what happened. Back in 2007, NASA's Spirit rover snapped a picture that sent the internet into full-on meltdown mode. It looked like a tiny humanoid figure just casually sitting on a rock in the middle of the Martian landscape. Naturally, the internet lost its collective mind. Was it proof of intelligent life on Mars? An ancient statue left behind by a forgotten civilization? Or, my personal favorite, a little Martian just chilling, watching NASA's robot roll by like, seriously, another one? NASA, of course, came in like the ultimate buzzkill, saying it was just pareidolia, our brain's weird habit of seeing faces and shapes in random objects. Basically, relax, it's just a rock. We're not hiding anything. But let's be real, that thing has a head, a torso, arms, and legs, and even looks like it's posed in a thoughtful little sit. Tell me that's just a rock and not some tiny alien philosopher contemplating the mysteries of the universe. The truth is, NASA says it's a funky-shaped rock, but considering how little we actually know about Mars, I'd like to believe there's a mini Martian up there, forever immortalized in one of the most bizarre space photos ever taken. To the missing tapes. Imagine having the most important video footage in human history, the original, high-quality tapes of the Apollo 11 moon landing, and somehow losing them.
3 lost NASA videotape recordings of the first landing on the moon are about to go under the auctioneer's hammer in New York.
Sounds ridiculous, right? Well, that's exactly what NASA did. For decades, conspiracy theories have swirled around the Apollo 11 mission, but nothing adds fuel to the fire quite like the fact that NASA literally misplaced the original broadcast tapes. I'm not talking about copies. I mean the raw, high-definition, slow-scan TV footage directly recorded from the lunar lander, the version the public saw on TV. That was a downgraded, grainy transmission, re-recorded by pointing a camera at a monitor. The real footage vanished. NASA's excuse was bureaucratic incompetence. The official story is that during the 1980s, over 200,000 magnetic tapes were either erased or reused due to storage issues. And yes, apparently, they just happened to erase humanity's first steps on another world to save some shelf space. But here's where it gets even weirder. They later found some tapes, but not the originals. In 2006, NASA admitted they had no idea where the master recordings were, but a private search led to the discovery of some restored Apollo 11 footage.
NASA recently announced a major discovery. They found water on the sunlit side of the moon.
Strange structures on the moon? UFOs? Or was it really just an embarrassing case?
3 lost NASA videotape recordings of the first landing on the moon are about to go under the auctioneer's hammer in New York.
Of government-level negligence. Either way, the fact remains, NASA misplaced one of the most significant pieces of film ever recorded. And if they did happen to find the originals, you have to wonder.
There's definitely been conspiracies that have been put together and executed, and these conspiracies have greatly affected the American people.
Would they even tell us?